Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Na mô tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. And blessings to you all. Today at the monastery we had a visit from a monk called Ajahn Kalyano, who is the abbot of Wat Pa Banta, which is the monastery established by Ajahn Mahabua. He's now the abbot there. Ajahn Mahabua passed away over 10 years ago now. So Ajahn Kalyano, one of his students, is the abbot, and he came to visit us, so it was a chance to catch up, because it's a monastery I used to visit and stay regularly when I was a younger monk living in Thailand. Ajahn Kalyano himself has been very fortunate. He became a monk over 50 years ago. So when he first became a monk, there were many of the original students of Luang Por Man still alive in northeast Thailand. And he was fortunate to go and stay with some of the leading meditation masters of the time. He's not old enough to have met and practiced with Luang Por Man, but he practiced with many of his students, such as Ajahn Mahabua, but also Luang Por Wen, and Luang Por Sim, and Ajahn Phun, another one. So I was talking to him about some of his experiences with those different teachers, because they're all highly respected, highly regarded meditation masters in their own right, even though they all are students of, or were students of Ajahn Mun. And he was with Luang Por Wen for three years. So it's obviously a good chance to stay with a monk who is considered to have been an arahant, fully enlightened monk. And at the time, you might say, was a household name in Thailand. Luang Por Wen was probably most famous, as is common with monks who have developed deep levels of samadhi and concentration and different abilities. He's probably most famous for having been seen by an Air Force pilot who was flying over the area of Chiang Mai and saw a monk sitting in the clouds and then, not knowing who the monk was, when he landed, was asking other monks. I think the pilot was foreign, but anyway, he was asking some of the Thai pilots who this monk could have been, and then he started driving around the area where he saw the monk sitting in the clouds meditating, and eventually he came to Luang Por Wen's monastery, a little forest monastery on a hill in the Chiang Mai province of Thailand, and Luang Por Wen, of course, denied the whole thing, didn't talk about it, didn't make it into anything. But they say the Air Force pilot was convinced this is the monk he'd seen floating in the sky. So that became front page news in Thailand. Of course, one simple incident like that, whether you believe it or not anyway, does not make a whole life story of a monk, and certainly not what his teaching style or method was. So I was asking about how he taught the monks who lived with him. And Ajahn Kalyano said his main emphasis was encouraging practitioners to just practice a lot of mindfulness and learn to keep their mind in the present moment as much as possible. To learn how to let go of this tendency we have to always be thinking of the future with expectation, worry, anxiety, anticipation, just endlessly planning, scheming, or worrying about the future, or dwelling in the past. Not dwelling in the past, not endlessly going over past events, good and bad, holding on to them, wishing things had been different, wishing good experiences were still with us. These are the kind of basic experiences anyone who starts learning meditation will have. It's just you notice how much of your mind and how much of your time is spent either with thoughts about the future or thoughts about the past. And it's almost as if the last place you know anything about is the present moment. And that's the kind of the problem or the task that we have to address, is this fact that our mind doesn't like to stay in the present moment very much. Which is probably why Luang Por Wen emphasized it so much for anyone who really wants to pursue progress in the Buddhist path towards Nibbana, to really train the mind, to really experience the kind of happiness that he must have experienced. You really have to learn how to keep your mind in the present moment as much as possible and have that ability just to drop the endless thinking about the past and the future. So it's not easy because it takes training, takes effort. But at the same time, it's a fairly simple instruction. You keep your mind in the present moment. And we can do it sometimes. But most of the time when we do it, we're probably doing it simply because we are absorbing into some experience that we're having, and we're not actually consciously practicing the Buddhist path of developing mindfulness and wisdom with right view. It may be just you're really concentrating your mind on something. For instance, when you really like something, say you're talking to someone that you like talking to, or playing some game, or involved with some entertainment, or eating nice food that you really like. You tend to pay attention to stuff you really like, but you're not necessarily being mindful. Or we also do it when there's something we really don't like. It can also keep our mind in the present moment because you're trying to get away, maybe trying to get away from what you don't like. So the obvious one is if you're experiencing some pain in your body somewhere, we don't like pain. So as long as it keeps impinging on our consciousness, we'll keep thinking about it. How can I get rid of it? What can I do? Can I distract myself from this? Can I stop this pain? So something like pain or painful, unpleasant experiences also can drag us back to the present moment. But the problem is we're not always fully aware and fully understanding what's going on. Maybe through a lack of what we say right view or right understanding. But Luang Por Wen and all the other enlightened masters, they taught the whole Buddhist path, so they always emphasized the importance to develop wisdom and understanding as we practice. Even though we are aiming to bring our mind to the present moment all the time, over and over again, but to do that with an understanding of why and what the purpose of it is. And the main purpose is to have more self-control and more clarity so that you can see where the causes of suffering are coming up in your mind. So the mind is the forerunner, the beginning, the leader of everything we do. Even though you go about your business every day, you might think, well, I'm just doing my job, or I'm just traveling here, traveling there, or I'm eating, or I'm enjoying myself in some way. That all starts in the mind, doesn't it? You have an intention, you have a desire, a thought, but much of the time we're not really aware of that. We're just doing things more out of habit, sort of kind of going along with what we've sort of agreed with ourselves or what life has agreed with us. from the past, and we're not fully aware and fully mindful of what's happening. But as you practice mindfulness more consciously, whether you are meditating or just going about your daily business, but introducing this quality of mindfulness as much as possible, you notice, will you start to become aware of your intentions, different states of mind as they come up, how you feel, what you're thinking. You do become much more aware of these things, and you also can see how your suffering and happiness, is determined by the quality of your mind and the kind of mental states and qualities that you're bringing up or experiencing in your mind. Luang Por Sutham also, he mentioned how Luang Por Wen, like so many other teachers, just would state the obvious, that human beings, normally we're obsessed, you might say, or spending so much time trying to keep this body comfortable and make a life of convenience, comfort for this body, to look after it, keep it going, keep it feeling good, keeping it healthy, and so on. Which all sounds very reasonable, and because everyone else does it, most people probably never question this. But he would say, well, it's really a losing battle, isn't it, the human body? Because once you're born, from day one, you're getting older. Even a child is getting older every day. And as you really get older, say if you live 30, 40, 50 years, well, you start to experience the aging of the body much more completely, or it's more obvious. But that's our fate as human beings, is we've got to get older every day. And with aging, we also get weaker, more prone to sickness. And of course, one day we've got to die. And yet we spend so much time trying to keep the body happy, as it were. So we go out and we earn money so we can buy the things we need to make the body feel comfortable. We build or rent houses, buy houses to have a nice comfortable place to live, and we fill it full of furnishings and technology and equipment to look after this body, and we have schools and hospitals and cars and roads and all the things that human society builds and establishes. Largely it's to make the body comfortable, convenient. But because the body is destined to get old, get sick and ultimately die, it's kind of like this losing battle, and you can never quite achieve what you set out to, which is to try and make the body feel good, be perfectly happy and healthy all the time. It's impossible. And it also means that we spend an awful lot of time neglecting the more important thing, which is our mind. So Luang Por Wen would say, you train the mind. And that doesn't mean to say we should neglect our body, or what we do with our bodies and the physical, material side of our existence doesn't matter. It does, because that can support the mind as well and influence the mind. But it's not the most important thing. The most important thing for our ultimate happiness and well-being is our mind, our state of mind, and what we're doing with our mind, because it influences everything. But because we aren't perfectly mindful, we forget this, and we keep going back to the body. So human beings are kind of sensual beings. We have eyes and ears, and we can feel things through our skin, and we can smell and taste. We're sensual beings in that we have a physical body with senses. And a big source of our confusion and delusion in life is just we're constantly obsessed with the objects of our senses. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, and then we keep reacting to them. But again, our teachers like Luang Por Wen said, well, come back to the mind. So even though you do have a body and it's sensitive and you do, it's a big part of our life, how to deal with the sensual realm, all the different objects that come our way every day. The most important thing is to train the mind in how to deal with all that well and to understand it well. And for that you need to be mindful, need to pay attention. Our aim is to be mindful more and more through our day, through our life, so that we can know when we are seeing something or hearing something or tasting something or even just thinking about something, to know what's going on. What is the nature of the object that we're experiencing? Could be pleasant, could be unpleasant, could be neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But to know that, and to know how it can trigger or prompt the mind falling into different kinds of craving and attachment. To know that, to pay attention, and to do that you need to be mindful. So Luang Por Wen would often have this kind of teaching. He would keep reminding his students, not just monks but also the lay practitioners who came to stay with him, remind them, train your mind. Sometimes they use the word heart sort of interchangeably, so it's heart or mind. In Thai it's jit and jai. He said, train your heart, train your mind, not to fall into delusion. Because as long as you're under the influence of delusion, you can't understand the truth, the Dhamma. You can't free your mind from stress, from suffering. So we constantly have to be bringing up mindfulness, clarity, insight, in order to counteract delusion. And he would just teach this over and over again. As I said, he didn't say neglect the body, or that the material world doesn't count. Not at all. And Ajahn Sutham was saying, Luang Por Wen would teach anyone who came to stay in the monastery, and that includes men and women, lay people who would stay temporarily. He'd teach them the ways of monastic training, Buddhist monastic training. So for monks we have the Vinaya, the rules of training, rules of discipline, which we keep. Different monastic practices, learning how to respect each other, develop mindfulness in the way we speak, we act, learning how to cooperate, harmonize with each other, to look after the monastery, to develop a good atmosphere in the monastery so that you can go deeper into your meditation practice. Luang Por Wen would emphasize this. And the same for lay people. And he was saying Luang Por Wen would often comment on how when lay people are new to monastic practice or the training of the forest monasteries, they come into the monastery and their minds will be all over the place because they're not trained, understandably, and that will be reflected in the way they behave. So most people, when they first come to a monastery, talk a lot, but a lot about stuff which is totally unrelated to Dhamma practice and maybe quite distracting, or even just kind of putting obstacles in their way by thinking and talking too much about worldly stuff. Or sometimes, their behavior, they're a bit undisciplined, and so they're not so good at being able to sit and walk meditation yet, or do the various chores, activities that are assigned to them. So, it takes time to train, and you have to be able to be willing to give yourself time to train when you come into the monastery. And he said Luang Por Wen would pick people up on their behavior and say, if you've been oversleeping, or you're talking too much, or eating too much, or you're doing some activity but you're not very mindful, not very paying much attention to what you're doing, he would point this out to people. He'd say, where's your mind right now, as it were, to bring them back to the present moment. Because if we're honest, this is going on all the time, isn't it? Our mind is constantly falling away from the present moment into our thoughts and daydreams and moods. And as you start practicing mindfulness, you notice this. And at first it's very frustrating, and that's why we need to be very patient when we start to practice and train with the mind, because it's very frustrating to keep seeing your mind falling away from the present moment and losing mindfulness. It's one thing if other people know about it. So if you've got a teacher like Luang Por Wen who is, you might say perfectly mindful, very sharp, very wise and very skilled in observing and knowing other people, it's embarrassing when the teacher keeps pointing out your lack of mindfulness. But it's also frustrating when you notice yourself, which is the real aim of the practice, to realize for yourself, oh, I've lost my mindfulness again. So you also need to be humble. You need a lot of humility to practice this path if you really want to train your mind. Because one of the biggest obstacles is, this self-belief that, I know, I'm right, I'm correct, I'm this way, I'm that way, which is often where we're starting in our practice. We have all these kind of self-views, who we are or who we think we are. And no one likes to admit that they're not very mindful or not very good at the practice or don't really know how to practice yet. We don't like to say that. But actually that's what we need to realize, whether we say it or not. It's one thing, but we have to know for ourselves or realize for ourselves. We have to train, we have to practice. But because people would have a lot of faith in Luang Por Wen, not simply because somebody saw him meditating in the clouds, but because they lived with him and realized he was a very mindful and wise, peaceful teacher. They had faith in him, so they were willing to have him correct them. So when they would do things wrong, make mistakes, they would, correct whatever they felt about it. I don't know because I wasn't there, but they were willing for him to correct them if they were sleeping too much, talking too much, too lazy in this way or that way, too distracted, going in the wrong direction in their practice in some way or other. He would correct them. And Ajahn Sutham said, well, one of the reasons people had faith in Luang Por Wen and were willing to listen to him because they knew he was, you might say, the real deal, the real thing. Ajahn Sutham regularly saw Luang Por Wen go without sleep at night. He would meditate to a certain time of night and then he'd come out and he'd walk meditation in front of his kuti, his hut in the forest. And he'd walk back and forth all night, quite regularly. And this isn't just when he was a young monk, this was right up until he was like in his 80s. He was almost 100 when he passed away. And when Ajahn Sutham was living with him, he was already, I think, about 80 years old. He might walk meditation all night long. And Ajahn Sutham asked him, how come you can sit and walk meditation all night long? He says, because he enjoys it. And Luang Por Wen said, you've got to practice to the point where you start to really enjoy your meditation. And of course, at first, it's not enjoyable. It's frustrating, it's challenging, difficult. Yeah, that's why you need the patience and the effort. But if you keep doing it, sooner or later you start to experience certain changes. You perhaps have a little bit more mindfulness, so you have more self-control, better ability to let go of all these thoughts about the future, the past. Your mind and body start to settle down, so usually you start to feel better. And Luang Por Wen would say you need to develop this quality of chanta. Chanda means the sort of the wholesome or skillful desire, the desire to practice. This is something people often mistake or they're not clear about because we hear teachers say, we have to let go of desire. Desire is craving. Craving is a cause of suffering, so all craving, all desire must be abandoned. But that's not entirely true, in that there are also what we call wholesome kinds of desire which should be cultivated, not abandoned. And this word chanda refers to that. It's that desire to want to practice. And it comes through the practice, really. The way it becomes established in your mind, in your heart, is through the practice you really get to see the benefits of what you're doing. Because you feel better and you're learning things, you're knowing things that maybe you didn't know before, then you really want to pursue the practice. You get absorbed into it, you enjoy it, and then you can maybe walk meditation all night long, even when you're 80 years old. Because you have chanda, you're not bored. It's the opposite of boredom. It's the opposite of sort of resistance, boredom, which we often experience in the beginning of our meditation because our mind is all over the place. It's the opposite of that. You're enjoying it. There's a physical and mental tranquility, peace, but there's also this interest to really learn, to find out, to overcome the obstacles, the problems, the attachments, the mental defilements, and just go deeper into the practice. And Luang Por Wen said you reach a point where that never disappears. At first it may be periods of time you have the desire to practice, you feel motivated, inspired, you want to do it, but then that may fade as well in the beginning. But if you keep practicing, you might reach a point where this quality chanda just doesn't disappear, doesn't stop. You may still have obstacles, it's not all necessarily sort of smooth and easy, but your interest to practice, your desire to practice doesn't fade after a point, it's just established. Becomes part of who you are, I guess you could say, or part of your character. Then you can do it maybe all night long perhaps. And sometimes people would ask Luang Por Wen, how can you just meditate? With meditation you don't have anything to kind of lean on. Your mind doesn't have any external objects, does it? You don't have something to look at or talk about or do it. You're just becoming aware internally of your body and mind in the meditation. You don't have anything else to focus on. How can you do that? How can you get to that point? And people who had never experienced it would have that doubt. And Luang Por Wen would say, well, you as usually it's lay people who have that doubt, but it could be a monk as well. But you say you as a lay person, you can quite easily go to some kind of social event, a party or some kind of entertainment, music or whatever it is, and you can absorb into that for hours and hours, can't you? And when you're absorbed into some kind of enjoyable social occasion, entertainment, sport, whatever it is, you don't think about tiredness, you're not bored, you don't think much about your body, you don't even necessarily need to eat or do anything else. You're quite happy and content to keep going with whatever that activity is. Except it's an activity based on sensual stimulation. So it doesn't lead anywhere as such, it just, it takes up your time, makes you feel good for a while maybe, but you don't get any real knowledge or understanding from that. It doesn't leave you with anything at the end. Whereas when you practice meditation and you get to a similar point where you can really absorb into your meditation, you're happy to do it maybe for many hours, back and forth walking or sitting. At the end of it, you do get something, you get an inner happiness that stays with you, and you get insight, understanding that stays with you. You get Dhamma. And that's the difference. That's why the Dhamma is better than just the more kind of worldly or sensual happiness that we are usually pursuing as human beings. And people believed him when he said that because they could see Luang Por Wen kind of embodied that, the happiness of the Dhamma. He was totally uninterested in fame and fortune and wealth and material possessions or anything like that. He wasn't seeking anything from the world materially. All his happiness came from inner qualities of mind that came from the Dhamma practice. So when he would describe that, people believed it and they wanted to follow him. So this is something we have to cultivate, I think, this quality of chanda, wholesome desire to do the practice. You can't, in the end, you can't force someone to practice meditation, practice Dhamma. It has to come from a willingness, or you might say a wholesome desire to do it. And certainly in the beginning, that willingness to practice, sometimes it's strong and clear, sometimes it fades away, and we have to accept that. But you can see how if you keep practicing, one of your aims is to get to the point where you do quite naturally want to practice and keep practicing, training your mind to abandon mental defilements. And your aim is to get to a point where you don't have to force yourself or make yourself do it. You just want to do it because you know it's the right thing, the best thing for you. When that time will come, who knows? Some people may be quicker, some people slower. But to get that understanding, we really have to learn how to enjoy the practice, you might say, and get to that point where we're quite motivated, willing to practice, and it's not someone else telling us or forcing us to do it. It's coming from ourselves, from what we've seen as something good in our own life, in our own mind, and then we'll be willing to do it. Less doubts, less uncertainty about it, more a sense of confidence or conviction in the goodness of Dhamma practice. Then it gets easier. You're not bored, you're not resistant, you're not frustrated. You still may have challenges, but you're willing to learn and overcome them through the practice. So just a few reflections today, stimulated by my conversation with our visiting monk today, and recollecting one of the great meditation masters of Thailand, Luang Por Wen. Maybe I'll leave the talk there, and we can answer any questions if you have any questions after this.